In 1942, a psychiatrist in Vienna was arrested by the Nazis. He was 37 years old. He had a manuscript in his coat pocket, years of research, the work of his life, that was confiscated the moment he arrived at the concentration camp. His name was Viktor Frankl, and what he observed over the next 3 years, in Auschwitz, in Dachau, in the most extreme conditions of human suffering ever documented, became one of the most important psychological discoveries of the 20th century. Not about trauma, not about survival, not even really about the Holocaust, though it lives inside that history forever. It was about meaning, specifically about what happens to a human being when meaning disappears, and what becomes possible when it is found again. I want to talk about this book today not as a historical document and not as a summary. I want to talk about it as a mirror, because the question Frankl spent his entire life asking, why do some people survive what others cannot, is the same question sitting underneath a lot of the things your audience is feeling right now. The emptiness, the exhaustion, the sense of going through the motions of a life that looks fine from the outside, but feels hollow from within. Frankl had something to say about all of it, and it is not what most people expect. Viktor Frankl was not an ordinary prisoner. He was trained as a psychiatrist and neurologist in Vienna, a student of both Freud and Adler, and he arrived at Auschwitz with something most prisoners did not have: a framework for watching. He observed everything. Not from a distance, he was starving, working, living in conditions designed to destroy the human spirit. But he watched. He watched who survived. He watched who gave up. He watched the specific moment when a person's will to live flickered and went out. And he tried to understand what made the difference. What he found was not what he expected. It was not the physically strongest who survived longest. It was not the youngest. It was not even the most resilient in any conventional sense. The ones who survived, disproportionately, consistently, were the ones who had something to live for. Not something vague, something specific, a person waiting for them, a work unfinished, a question that still needed answering, a future, however uncertain, that felt like it belonged to them. Frankl himself survived partly by reconstructing his lost manuscript in his mind every night, rebuilding it page by page in the dark. Not because he was sure it would ever be published, but because the act of rebuilding it, the act of continuing to be the person who had written it, gave him a reason to wake up the next morning. He called this the will to meaning, and he believed, based on everything he witnessed, that it was the most fundamental drive in human psychology. Not pleasure, as Freud argued, not power, as Adler argued. Meaning. There is a line in this book that I have thought about more than almost anything I have ever read. Frankl writes, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Read that again, slowly. Everything can be taken. Not some things, not most things, everything. The food, the shelter, the safety, the people you love, the work you built, the future you planned, the identity you spent a lifetime constructing, all of it taken. And still, in the space between what happens to you and how you respond to it, there is a freedom that cannot be reached by anything the external world can do to you. Frankl watched prisoners in the camps choose to give their last piece of bread to someone who needed it more. He watched people walk through the barracks, comforting others when they themselves were dying. He was not romanticizing this, he was observing it. These were not extraordinary people in ordinary circumstances. They were ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And they had found, in the smallest possible freedom still available to them, something that preserved their humanity completely. Now bring this into your life. I am not comparing your life to a concentration camp. That would be obscene. But the principle Frankl identified, that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is your power, is not limited to the extreme end of human suffering. It is available in the ordinary suffering too. The relationship that ended, the career that didn't work out, the grief that arrived without asking permission, the days that feel hollow without obvious reason. In every one of those situations, however small the space feels, there is still a choice about what you become in response to it. That is not toxic positivity. That is the most honest and demanding thing Frankl ever said. Here is where the book becomes most relevant to right now. Frankl wrote about what he called the existential vacuum. He described it as a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century, a feeling of inner emptiness, a sense that life lacks direction or purpose. Not depression exactly, not sadness exactly, just a hollowness, a life that functions but does not feel. Sound familiar? Frankl believed this vacuum had a specific cause. For most of human history, he argued, people were told what to do and what to value by their traditions, their religion, their community, their family structure. They did not choose meaning. Meaning was handed to them. And then, gradually, then rapidly, those structures collapsed. The traditions became optional. The religion became questionable. The community became dispersed. The family structure became almost infinitely variable. And we were left, for the first time in human history, fully free to choose our own meaning. Which sounds like an extraordinary gift, and it is. But it is also, if you are not prepared for it, one of the most disorienting experiences available. Because freedom without direction does not feel like freedom. It feels like being lost in a very large space with no map. Frankl saw this arriving decades before it became the defining psychological experience of the 21st century. And what he said about it was not, find yourself, not follow your passion, not any of the things the self-help industry has been saying ever since. He said, meaning is not found, it is lived. Frankl identified 3 specific ways that human beings find meaning. Not 3 options to choose between, 3 dimensions of a complete life, and he believed that blocking even one of them produced a specific kind of suffering. The first is through what we give to the world. Our work, our creativity, our contribution. Not in the sense of productivity or achievement or success in any measurable way, in the sense of making something, bringing something into existence that would not have existed without you specifically. This does not have to be a career. It does not have to be recognized. It can be the garden you tend, the meals you make, the care you give to someone who needs it. The question is, are you bringing anything into the world that is yours? Something that could not have been brought by anyone else in quite the same way? If the answer is no, if the work feels entirely interchangeable, entirely replaceable, entirely disconnected from anything particular about you, Frankl would say that is where some of the hollow feeling is coming from. The second is through what we receive from the world: beauty, love, truth. The moments when something outside of you, a piece of music, a landscape, another person's presence, becomes so real and so vivid that for a moment you feel completely alive inside it. Frankl describes a moment in the camps when prisoners were being marched through a frozen field at dawn, exhausted, starving, barely alive, and one of them suddenly said, "Look at the sky," and they stopped. For a moment they simply looked. And Frankl writes that in that moment, despite everything, they were free. When did you last stop to receive something? Not consume, receive. To let something beautiful actually arrive in you rather than passing through on a screen. The third is through the suffering we cannot avoid. This is the one most people skip. Frankl is not saying that suffering is good. He is not romanticizing pain. He is saying that when suffering is unavoidable, when it arrives regardless of anything you do, the way you meet it becomes a source of meaning in itself. The person who loses someone and chooses to love what remains. The person who is diagnosed with something serious and decides what kind of human being they will be inside that reality. The person who fails, completely, publicly, painfully, and finds in the failure something that makes them more honest, more compassionate, more real than the success ever did. Frankl is not asking you to be grateful for suffering. He is asking you to consider, what will you do with it? Because you will have it. Everyone does. And the answer to that question is where some of the deepest meaning available to a human life actually lives.
I want to be direct with you for this section.
Because this book is one of the most misapplied books in existence. It gets quoted on motivational posters. It gets reduced to choose your attitude in a way that can feel like a dismissal of real pain. That is not what Frankl meant. He did not survive Auschwitz and then tell people to think more positively. He survived Auschwitz and then spent the rest of his life asking a single, serious question. What makes a life feel worth living? And his answer was not happiness. It was not pleasure. It was not comfort. It was meaning. The distinction matters. Happiness is a feeling. It arrives and it leaves based on what is happening to you. You cannot reliably produce it. You cannot will yourself into it. Meaning is different. Meaning is something you build, something you live, something that can exist even inside difficulty, even inside grief, even inside emptiness, even inside the kind of exhaustion that has no obvious cause. And this is the question I want to leave you with today. Not, are you happy? But, is there anything in your life right now that feels like it is yours, something you are making or receiving or enduring with intention, that could not be made or received or endured in quite the same way by anyone else? If there is, even one thing, even a small one, hold on to it. Frankl would say that one thing is enough to build from. If there is not, if the honest answer is that nothing feels particularly yours right now, then that is not a personal failure. It is the existential vacuum Frankl described. It is one of the most common experiences of modern life, and it has a direction, not toward happiness, toward meaning, which is something you can move toward even on the days you cannot feel anything at all.
Viktor Frankl left the camps.
He rebuilt his manuscript. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. He went on to become one of the most important psychiatrists of the century. Not because the suffering made him special, because he refused to let it be the last word about who he was. That is not a story about resilience. It is not a story about strength in any conventional sense. It is a story about a man who found one thing that belonged entirely to him, even when everything else was taken, and held on to it with everything he had. You have something like that. Maybe you have lost touch with it. Maybe the exhaustion has covered it. Maybe the grief, or the emptiness, or the going through the motions has made it hard to see. But it is there, the thing that is yours, the contribution only you can make, the love only you can give in the particular way you give it, the perspective only you have from the specific life only you have lived. Frankl would not tell you to find your purpose. He would tell you something much simpler and much more demanding. Live as though it matters. Because it does. And because, as he knew better than almost anyone, the alternative is not rest. The alternative is the hollow life. And you already know that is not what you are here for. This is Psyche and Stillness. Thank you for staying with me in the moment. I will see you in the next video.